He said he was going to kill his mom. He said he hated her. He said, if you make me go home, I will use any means necessary to escape, including kill my mom. Authorities heard him, but after a 72-hour mental health hold, they released him to his mom. And guess what? He killed her. And that wasn't the first parent 15-year-old Collin Griffith murdered. The year before, he shot his father, allegedly in self-defense. His mother backed him up, and Collin was released from jail and never charged with that crime. This is Crime Bites. I'm Carrie Drobin, award-winning multi-published true crime author, host and creator of the podcast Crime Stands Still, and criminal defense attorney. I'm staying on this phenomenon of teens murdering their parents because it's become a thing, a frightening, horrifying thing, especially if you're a parent raising a teenager. I mean, when is the teen mentally ill, and when is he or she devoid of empathy and just a psychopath? Collin's mother, by all accounts, was devoted to him. Some would argue trauma bonded with him to such an extent that she didn't see him or didn't want to accept what she knew to be true, that she could not control him, that he was, in fact, dangerous and always had been. Her marriage to her now dead ex-husband was rife with psychological and physical abuse, so much so that some professionals have asserted that she became desensitized to violence. She had normalized the insane, making excuses for dangerous behavior, thinking if she could just be better, do better, she would be loved enough. But it would never be enough, and sometimes giving up is the strong thing. Psychological abuse is a crime without a crime scene. It's largely invisible and insidious. It's the enemy within, and tragically, victims often pay the price with their life. Collin's mother, Catherine Griffith, who was discovered dead in her Florida home, was stabbed twice with a butcher knife through her neck. Catherine appeared to have a happy life, at least judging by her upbeat social media posts, peppered with smiling photos of her and Collin on cruises and trips to Australia and Key West. But behind the selfies and poses lay a darker truth. Her son had assaulted his mom the year before, arrested for domestic violence and placed on probation, and Collin openly stated how much he hated his mom. Some professionals speculated this was because she failed to protect him from her ex-husband's abuse. Perhaps she was overcompensating with Collin, buying him a car for his high school graduation, taking him to Australia, showering him with love. She ignored the red flags. Maybe she didn't see them at all, didn't want to see them. But she showed signs of exhaustion, fatigue, despair. She texted friends in the know about her frequent arguments with Collin, how every time she tried to discipline him by taking his phone away or grounding him, or, as in her last threat before she was killed, report him to his probation officer, he raged uncontrollably. Some said he snapped, but I argue people don't snap. They just are. And when people show you who they are the first time, believe it. Collin murdered his mom 3 days after returning from their cruise. He went from zero to murder in 60 seconds. Collin had been twice hospitalized, placed on a 72-hour mental health hold because he posed a danger to himself or others, namely his mom. He threatened staff and was held for several days more, but eventually he was released and returned, yep, you guessed it, to his mom. The system failed her. Collin did what he promised he would, murdered her. Then he calmly called 911 and he told police that she fell on the knife. I know what you're thinking. Any teenager who murders his parents must be crazy, right? I mean, there's crazy like a fox, cunning and calculated, and then there's mentally ill. The different in the latter should be treated and tended to. The former should be punished and incarcerated. Which begs the question, was Collin mentally ill according to the law? Does his condition merit treatment in a mental health hospital? I would argue no. I would argue that Collin has all the hallmarks of a psychopath. Lack of remorse, empathy, or guilt. Pure, unabashed evil. Incurable, resistant to treatment of any kind. His actions don't meet the legal standard for mental illness. Why? Because he was calculated, methodical. He knew right from wrong. He made a clear choice when he murdered his mother. He stabbed her in the neck with a fixed blade, where major arteries are, where she would die almost instantly. And he stabbed her twice. Stabbing is intimate. It's not like a sniper who shoots from afar, whose targets are more like dots. This killing was up close and personal, and that alone made it chilling. He was like a hunter gutting a deer. The criminal justice system doesn't know how to deal with juveniles or mental illness, and the fact that Collin was a teenager is of no moment. I mean, to quote the sheriff, "You see a kid, I see a psychopath." So, what's going on with these cases? And there seem to be a rash of them. It's twofold. We lack a mechanism for dealing with violence. We give people a pass. We give kids a pass. We lump truly dangerous people into the same category as mentally ill, and that, in and of itself, is dangerous. I wrote a book about the mass shooter James Holmes, who massacred moviegoers at the premiere of The Dark Knight. His own psychiatrist believed he was evil, not mentally ill. Why? Because he lacked empathy and he fantasized about killing people. He believed that killing them would increase his own self-worth. He assigned points to them. He wasn't crazy, he was dangerous. And his psychiatrist did everything she could to convince others he was dangerous. But no one believed her until it was too late, until he acted on his fantasy. Again, he did what he said he was going to do. Tyler Hadley killed his parents because they were trying to get him help for his drug addiction. They had enrolled him in rehab. He wanted to have a party at his house. His parents were in the way. They were obstacles to his happiness. So he killed them. Gavin Smith, a 17-year-old, killed his family because they didn't like his girlfriend, or so he thought. Both were arrested and evaluated. They sound insane, but they're not. Their relationship was the start of a disaster. Their defense attorneys argued that both teens were not raised properly. The girlfriend had experienced significant loss and was saddened by the death of her own mother. Okay, so that makes sense, right? She lost her mom, so her boyfriend should lose his. Gavin told her he was being mistreated at home, so naturally it was time to remove the threat to his happiness, right? Just get rid of his parents. So what we're seeing is this uncontrolled response to stimuli. If a parent pushes back, tries to parent, God forbid, they are now in danger of being murdered. So as in Collin Griffith's case, she relented, she backed off, she did what she'd always done to thwart her ex-husband's abuse. She surrendered, and it got her killed. Collin had literally told authorities how he would kill her. He said he'd throw her out of the car, he'd shoot her, he'd stab her. He said, "I did it before, I'll do it again." Here's what's chilling. Not only what he said, but what he didn't say. When the cops arrived, he's covered in blood and says, after he tells them his mom fell on the knife, "I know my rights. I want an attorney." That is not the statement of a mentally ill person. That's the statement of a cold, calculated killer who knows the system, who plays the system. He played his mom too. She covered for him when he killed her ex-husband, telling authorities it was self-defense so that they would release her son from jail. I mean, it's so hard to be a bystander to these cases, to suspect something is not right, but be powerless to help. I mean, this mom was a well-loved teacher, a beautiful person. She gave everything to everyone else. She learned that all she had to do to be accepted was stop protecting herself. I mean, we see this all too often in abusive situations where the abused makes excuses for their abuser. They stay in these toxic relationships because they stay for their children or because they blame themselves, thinking if only they did something different, maybe their abuser would stop, would love them. I go back to this mantra all the time. If you see something, say something. Don't be an ostrich. Neighbors saw Collin drag his mother into the house by her hair before he murdered her. They just watched. Following the shooting death of his father, authorities indicated that Collin was being intensely watched by the county sheriff's office. I mean, could anything more have been done to prevent this? The authorities who placed Collin on a 72-hour hold certainly didn't have to return him to his mother. Collin was on probation for battery, domestic violence against his mother, with conditions that included no contact with his mother. So why return the predator to his prey? I mean, does that make any sense? He's being held because he's dangerous. He's being watched, observed because he's dangerous. And by the way, during that period of time that he's being watched, he's continuing to make threats. His poor mother, who's the victim of domestic violence, is texting her friends who know she's in dire straits. She's exhausted, depleted, traumatized, convinced that her son just needs more love, more guardrails. She's mistaken. But at least she's communicating to people, right? So everyone is watching Collin to see if he'll finally behave. But they already know he won't. He's told them he won't. They just don't believe it. We cannot make that same mistake and make excuses for Collin. Some kids cannot be helped. Evil is not a mental illness. Thankfully, he'll be tried as an adult. But sadly, this phenomenon of teens killing their parents is not going away anytime soon. But being honest about what we're seeing can only lead to prevention. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. And check out my website, carriedrobin.com. Meanwhile, stay vigilant, stay informed, and above all, stay safe.